Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're not just analyzing a topic. We are stepping right into a moment of digital collapse.
It really feels that way.
We've been given access to some incredibly candid audio and notes, too, that detail this turbulent and just intensely emotional experience inside a very specific corner of Twitter Spaces.
A place that was, and this is the crucial part, a place that was built to be a sanctuary.
Exactly. And it just violently betrayed that purpose.
That really is the core conflict, isn't it? Our listeners shared sources that document the deep psychological toll that the sustained digital toxicity took on the central figure, a man named Alberto.
Right.
So our mission today is to take this really personal story, this raw lived experience, and use it almost like a lens
A lens to see what.
to analyze the incredibly complex and often, fraught communication dynamics between everyone involved, and to really confront this devastating irony of a safe space collapsing into a zone of trauma.
And when you look at why he built it in the first place, the paradox is, it's absolutely striking. Alberto came back to this platform looking for a place to heal.
Yeah, from some genuinely complicated prior emotional trauma.
And what he found was not support. It was. It was systematic disrespect and aggression right inside the very digital home he had painstakingly built for security.
He walked into his own shield.
And found a weapon pointed right back at him. Let's really try to unpack the weight of that immediate betrayal.
To get the scale of it, I think we have to anchor ourselves in Alberto's original intent and his personal history. This wasn't some casual project for him.
No, not at all. He founded the security community and also the EPA's security community. These were meant to be much more than just, places to network.
He literally called it a sanctuary.
He did. He's on record saying his foundational goal was to create a safe place, a place where people could be genuinely listened to, feel protected.
And talk about really difficult, high-stakes stuff like
Right.
cybersecurity without any fear of being judged or attacked for it.
So that need for security was baked into the community's DNA from the very start.
We shouldn't just gloss over the scale of this. This was a massive effort. Alberto notes that as far as he knew, it was the first community of its kind on Twitter.
And it was huge.
It was huge. He managed to attract and keep a following of 10,000 members in each of his 2 accounts.
Wow.
So think about that for a second. The sheer managerial and the emotional labor that's required to sustain a community that size, day in and day out.
It's a full-time job.
Yeah.
More than a full-time job.
It was a massive, all-consuming investment of his time, his energy, his whole self.
And that investment, it came from a place of really deep personal necessity. It wasn't just a passion project.
No. He says he came back to Twitter Spaces specifically to keep his mind busy.
As a form of healing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A way to heal from a recent, really complicated emotional event that had, deeply affected him psychologically. He was looking for something external to focus on. His words were to heal that toxicity.
So the act of building the community was supposed to be a kind of self-therapy. A distraction.
And that is where their irony just becomes tragic.
Right.
He builds this intricate container for his own healing and for others, but instead of providing the therapy he was so desperately seeking, Alberto found, and I'm quoting him, more toxicity, more aggression.
And he concluded his emotional state became much worse than before he even came back.
Much worse. His attempt to build a sanctuary against chaos just imported the chaos directly into his inner world.
It's the absolute definition of an unintended consequence,
Yeah.
but one with just profound psychological damage.
The very structure he built for safety led to the exact opposite result. It's a complete betrayal of his foundational intent.
But to really get why this aggression hit him so hard, we have to look at the vulnerability he was already carrying with him. We have to talk about his past trauma.
Absolutely. His history is critical context here. Alberto carries this scar of being unjustly targeted and punished by the very system he was trying to help.
The incident in Uruguay.
Exactly. Years ago, he was sent to prison for responsibly reporting a major security vulnerability.
He exposed, 200 medical records?
Yes, in a medical provider in Uruguay. His act of ethical disclosure, of doing the right thing, was somehow interpreted by the authorities as malicious hacking?
That is just a staggering miscarriage of justice. Think about that. He tries to protect people, to protect their private medical data.
And he gets treated like a criminal for it.
So that history, it fundamentally shapes his commitment to security, sure. But more importantly, it makes him intensely sensitive to being unjustly targeted.
Or systematically disrespected, or having his intentions completely misrepresented.
So now, When he faces aggression in this new community, the
Yeah.
one he built, it doesn't just feel like some random online spat.
No, of course not. It triggers that deeper memory of being punished for doing good work. It makes his tolerance for this kind of toxicity almost zero, even if, ironically, he let this one aggressor go on for far too long.
Okay, so let's pivot now. Let's zero in on the specific source of this conflict that just destroyed his peace. Alberto identifies one individual, we'll just call him T, who became this relentless aggressor.
And the language Alberto uses to describe him it's extremely strong.
Yeah, he calls him a pain in the A who is constantly and ruthlessly fing with us.
And not just for a day or a week. This was over a sustained period of months. This wasn't a burst of temper.
No, this was a campaign.
The systematic nature of it is the key thing to analyze here. It wasn't just random noise. It was an escalating strategy, a strategy designed to break down the community's infrastructure and Alberto's personal defenses.
So let's look at that progression. How did the disrespect start?
Initially, the source material says the harassment was almost technical. It was based on noise.
Right, he said T was constantly loud, had an open mic, just generally disrupting the space's audio, the flow of conversation.
And at first, Alberto tried to handle it with just incredible patience.
He tried to diffuse it with humor.
Right. He did. He went so far as joking about giving T a trophy for being the most annoying person in the space.
That's a demonstration of extreme emotional regulation, trying to treat this constant disruption as just some benign, if annoying, mistake.
But then came the moment that changed everything, the moment of clarity that confirmed it was all malicious.
What happened?
Alberto noted that after he finally called him out on the noise, T suddenly learned how to mute his mic and respect the space. Perfectly.
Oh.
Yeah. And that realization is profound. It means the prior disruption wasn't accidental. It wasn't ignorance or a tech glitch.
The aggressor was capable of respecting the norms the entire time.
He was. He had just deliberately chosen not to. He was using noise as a weapon right up until he was forced to stop.
And once that weapon was taken away,
The aggression immediately pivoted. It shifted to these profoundly targeted personal attacks that struck directly at Alberto's identity.
this is where it gets really ugly.
It does. The sources detail how T started repeatedly asking, in public, Alberto, why do you watch so much gay content? Alberto, why are you so gay?
And he even titled entire public Twitter spaces with things like, oh, Alberto is very gay.
Exactly. And this is where we have to pause, because this is where the digital toxicity metastasizes. It stops being just words in a chat and becomes a permanent, searchable reality.
The digital scar.
That's it. The harassment moved beyond the ephemeral nature of a live conversation and imprinted itself onto his public identity.
This is the high-impact moment
Yeah.
that needs a deep exploration. Tell us what Alberto did next.
He recounted searching for information about himself, just, doing a check on his own digital footprint using Grok.
Which is an advanced AI tool, right? It summarizes current social media data.
Exactly. And the output he got back, it was devastating. Grok stated, Alberto is very open with his identity. He has no problem. He openly talks about how it is to be gay in Uruguay.
That is absolutely horrifying.
Yeah. It's horrifying. The output of what's supposed to be an objective, large language model, a system designed to just reflect public data, confirmed a malicious lie.
A lie that was manufactured by T's space titles and his public mockery. The algorithm just scraped it and interpreted it as fact.
Think about the psychological violation there. Cyberbullying is one thing, a terrible thing. But this is the weaponization of platform data and AI algorithms against someone's core sense of self.
He didn't just hurt him in the moment. He effectively edited Alberto's public identity without his consent.
And for someone who, as we discussed, already has this history of being misrepresented and unjustly punished by authority, his prison time, for him to have an AI confirm a malicious lie that he explicitly denies and finds offensive,
It's the ultimate form of digital identity violation.
it turns fleeting gossip into this permanent, searchable reality that now defines him in the cold, hard logic of an algorithm.
The psychological cost of seeing your own reality rewritten by what's supposed to be an objective tool because of someone else's malice, I mean, it's impossible to overstate.
Yeah.
It just confirms your total lack of control over your own story.
And what truly compounded this trauma, what made it so much worse, was the complete, staggering silence from the community. The very community he built to be his protector.
He reached out for help, didn't he?
He did. Alberto revealed he sent messages 20 times across tweets, DMs, other platforms, explicitly expressing that I was not okay. He was pleading for help.
Yeah.
And the sources confirm absolutely nobody in the community acted to protect him, despite his intense, obvious vulnerability.
So he was suffering in plain sight, making repeated requests for anyone to intervene.
Yeah,
And his chosen tribe just failed him.
completely. And that failure creates a deeper void than the aggressor ever could have on his own. He inflicted the wounds, sure.
But the community's inaction poured salt on them.
That failure of protection really sets the stage for analyzing the internal communication dynamics. Because when Alberto was spiraling, when he was in that state of intense anxiety and looking for any external safety, he gravitated towards specific people.
Specific anchors.
Yes, and one of the most important was Skykiss.
He talks about her with, profound admiration and reliance. He says her voice makes him feel so calm, so in peace.
And there was a deeper personal connection there, too. He mentioned she was the first person to ever read his book.
So this isn't just a casual supportive presence. He's establishing Skykiss as a crucial psychological anchor, a source of immediate, reliable soothing and validation that could, in theory, counter the aggression he was absorbing.
And this brings us right to the central communication question we have to address.
The interruption paradox.
Exactly. The question is, was Alberto intentionally disrespectful? Did he deliberately talk over Skykiss, or Helen, for that matter?
Because if you just listen to the raw audio, you might think so.
You might. But the evidence suggests that his high-energy, dominant communication style in those moments, it wasn't rooted in malice or intentional disrespect. It was rooted in severe anxiety-driven emotional dysregulation.
Okay, I understand that diagnosis, but this is where we need to challenge that a bit, I think. While we acknowledge the trauma, doesn't explaining his actions solely through the lens of anxiety risk ignoring the very real impact that this kind of communication has on the listener?
How do you mean?
Regardless of the speaker's motive, where do we draw the line between a trauma response and just basic conversational accountability?
Yeah.
A listener can still feel disrespected, they can feel shut down, even if the speaker's intent was just survival.
That is a crucial challenge, and you're right, the source material doesn't let us ignore that impact. However, when you deep dive into the audio, the mechanism driving his interruptions seems to be this desperate attempt to fill a void of non-response.
A void he's terrified of.
A void that his history of being ignored and abandoned by his community had conditioned him to fear above all else. So his interruption is less about disrespecting the person speaking, and more about desperately seeking immediate proof of presence, of validation.
Let's use the example from the source material. The conversation where he's trying to get Skykiss to confirm a hint about a Bryan Adams song. The Pink Cat reference.
A perfect example. You can hear the anxiety is just palpable in that moment. He's rapidly firing these complex questions, just trying to confirm that she was listening, that she understood his anxious spiral.
And her lack of an immediate, audible response, which could have been anything, a tech delay, her just taking a second to process.
To him, it felt like torture. That little pocket of silence triggered his deeper trauma. It brought back the memory of being abandoned and unprotected when T was attacking him.
And because he couldn't tolerate that spike of anxiety, he immediately bypasses Skykiss. He looks for external confirmation, asking Billy to jump in and validate the conversation.
Instead of just pausing, or taking a breath, or repeating yourself clearly, his focus was singular. Am I being heard?
So the critical psychological implication here is that his disruptive communication style, the high speed, the rapid switching into Spanish, the interrupting, it was all just a manifestation of his severe internal emotional state.
Exactly. The fast Spanish, for example, might have been a physiological release valve for his anxiety. It wasn't trying to be rude or exclusionary.
He was engaging in a survival mechanism. He was trying to fill the emotional vacuum left by the community's prior failure to protect him. His interruptions were just a disguised cry for validation.
Which means we can't just label him as disrespectful. It's not that simple. We have to categorize his actions as emotionally driven disruptions that stem from a state of extreme vulnerability, not from malicious intent.
That being said, it really does highlight how incredibly difficult it is to maintain any kind of conversational structure when one person is in a state of emotional dysregulation.
And we see another person, Helen grappling with this exact difficulty. She's another crucial grounding voice in this whole story.
She offered some extremely practical, non-judgmental advice, urging him to focus on real-life grounding, take a breather, prioritize his health.
Her support was clearly empathetic. But, and this is crucial, the sources show it was limited by the dynamics of the situation.
Right. Helen herself admitted she genuinely struggled to follow the rapid-paced Spanish dialogue and the intense internal conflict details.
And that's a major structural challenge for any digital community. This language barrier meant that even though Helen was present and she was caring, she couldn't fully engage with the core emotional emergency that was happening in Spanish.
So the supportive intent can't translate into effective intervention if the drama itself is inaccessible because of pace and language. It leaves him feeling even more isolated.
Now, moving to a figure who did seem to penetrate that emotional barrier, we find Billy, or Bill.
The source material really establishes Billy as the true confidant, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Alberto trusts only Billy to hear the full, raw story. He explicitly defers explaining the conflict details to the others, saying only Billy knows the complete story of what the aggressor did.
And that relationship works because of their shared experience.
It's the key. Billy wasn't just an observer, he also suffered intense, threatening harassment from T.
And the threats Billy received they were violent. The sources say he was sent Fing pictures of knives and Fing all this like evil S.
I mean, that's an astonishing level of digital threat. It goes so far beyond verbal abuse and enters the realm of explicit, terrifying menace.
Billy noted that these threats were so intense they made him lose friends, and that he was nearly painted on the platform as a terrorist or some like mass murderer.
So they both shared this profound, dangerous trauma. But what makes Billy such a fascinating counter-narrative to Alberto is the coping mechanism he chose.
Right. Instead of being consumed by the anxiety and the spiral, Billy chose humor.
Here as a shield, a way to survive. And this is the profound irony's counterpart we were talking about earlier, resilience through levity. He found a way to laugh in the face of it.
He used humor as an act of defense.
Yeah.
Billy says he took it with humor instead of actually being the final element for his destruction.
That's not just a quirky personality trait. That's a conscious psychological survival strategy. He's using dark humor to deflate the seriousness of these potentially life-altering threats.
It's an active refusal to grant the aggressor the satisfaction of destroying his spirit.
And we see this mechanism demonstrated so clearly in a couple of anecdotes. The first is when a guest named James enters the space.
Right. James shares a story of heartbreak, and then, with no warning, he just pivots aggressively into xenophobia. He says, "No Indian is my buddy."
And Billy's response was immediate,
Yeah.
firm, and just saturated with sarcasm. He shut the racism and toxicity down instantly.
And that action is so critical because it highlights the community defense mechanism that Alberto failed to use against T.
Exactly. Billy demonstrated the ability to quickly identify and dispose of a rotten apple, which contrasts so sharply with Alberto's struggle to defend his own space against the systematic aggression he tolerated for months.
Billy has that instinct for active stewardship. He gets that if you let toxicity fester, it kills the entire organism.
And the second anecdote that shows Billy's approach is his focus on his new passion, cooking.
The Seabill kitchen.
Yeah, and he uses this self-deprecating humor to talk about his newfound fame, joking about getting 3 million impressions.
But crucially, he's redirecting his pain.
Hmm.
Billy talks openly and humorously about his physical pain pressure in his leg, the possibility of his own imminent death.
And he juxtaposes that with Alberto's all-consuming emotional pain. This is a survival mechanism. It's about forcing joy, forcing focus, forcing productivity in the face of despair.
He's consciously building this physical, tangible shield of cooking and humor against the digital threats that nearly destroyed him.
It is the ultimate lesson in boundary setting and emotional redirection. Billy chose not to let the aggressor define his reality. Instead, he channeled that energy into a real-world, tangible pursuit cooking that reinforces his value and his presence completely outside of that toxic digital space.
So given the sustained trauma and the realization that his own coping mechanisms were failing while he could see Billy succeeding, the narrative has to culminate in Alberto's decision.
A necessary but devastating decision to retreat.
He officially announces his departure from the security community and from the related Satoshi's Bride project.
This is a major declaration. It's a confirmation that he's reached the absolute limit of his psychological endurance.
He realizes he cannot possibly be responsible for managing these complex projects, especially not ones with 10,000 members, in his current mental state. He's forced to prioritize his own health above the community he built.
And he immediately takes action to solidify that departure, to distance himself from the toxicity. He says he intends to transfer the community administration, all 10,000 members, to a trusted woman named Samantha, or Sam.
And that handover signifies a hard boundary. He wants no further part in managing the platform's toxicity. It's an acknowledgement that the platform, as it's currently configured, is fundamentally unsafe for his well-being.
But the decision wasn't easy for him. It wasn't straightforward. He struggles internally with this dilemma of loyalty versus, surrender. He wrestles with the idea of just blocking the aggressors and trying to stay, to fight for his creation.
And Billy, the resilient one, he argues against the hard exit.
He argues vehemently against it. He insists that Alberto should get rid of the rotten apples, the toxic members, and just rebuild the community around the genuine supportive core that was still there.
Billy emphasizes Alberto's established position, all the positive work he'd already done. For Billy, retreating is seen as surrendering the space to the toxic elements. It's letting them win.
But you see the psychological limits at play? Alberto is just too compromised at this point to wage that war. The fight has already cost him far too much.
And this is where Helen and Skykiss re-enter the narrative, urging him towards a path of healing that is centered completely outside of the digital sphere.
They both strongly advocate for grounding himself in reality. Helen stresses the importance of real-life physical connections, and Alberto confirms he is already in therapy, that he's been working regularly with his doctor since 2020.
Which demonstrates his long-term commitment to mental health, but also shows that this digital trauma overwhelmed even that professional safety net.
And Skykiss in particular offers this beautiful and really potent analogy from her background in graphic design.
She tells him he needs white space.
She does. She explains that white space, the area on a page that you intentionally leave blank, is vital because it allows the main message to be seen clearly, without all the visual clutter.
So she's arguing that he needs to create that void of quiet and clarity in his real life, away from the constant noise of the platform.
So he can clearly see what his next steps should be, free from the pressure of the community's demands, and, more importantly, free from the aggressor's noise.
That analogy is just a powerful call for restorative solitude. It's telling him that sometimes the most productive action you can take is inaction. It's creating space for emotional recovery.
And the sources conclude with Alberto's final, crucial reflection, a reflection on responsibility and on self-accountability.
He recognizes his own mistake.
Yes, his own past mistake, which was tolerating the aggressor T's behavior for far too long. He tolerated it out of some misguided hope or a fear of confrontation or maybe a belief that he could somehow cure the toxicity.
And he vows never to make that mistake again. This realization is the ultimate synthesis of the entire experience for him. He recognizes that while his decisions, like creating the community, had positive intent,
they led to profoundly negative consequences because he failed to be an active, swift steward against toxicity the moment it first appeared.
he had to suffer the complete destruction of his own sanctuary to learn that fundamental truth.
That intent isn't enough, not even close. Active, uncompromising maintenance is what's required to actually protect a safe space.
So it started as Alberto's necessary search for connection and safety. It just spiraled into this profound digital pain. And it illustrates a critical lesson for anyone building or even just participating in online communities.
Which is?
There is a vast and dangerous difference between a place that is intended to be safe and a place that is actively maintained as safe.
This deep dive has really revealed the hidden costs of managing these communities and the corrosive power of sustained systematic harassment that can jump the barrier between the digital world and your personal identity.
That concept of the digital scar, having your identity maliciously rewritten by an algorithm, that is a terrifying new frontier of violation.
It really is. But within all this darkness, we also saw the immense power of focused empathy and presence.
Right. As we analyzed, Skykiss's voice and presence alone could rapidly counteract severe anxiety in Alberto.
It underscores that while these digital spaces can inflict deep, deep wounds, they also possess the tools for immediate psychological soothing, provided the right, actively empathetic people are present.
And crucially, that those people understand the dynamic complexity of trauma-driven communication. They have to know what they're looking at.
The entire story, but particularly that moment Alberto realized his community had failed to protect him despite his explicit vulnerability, it demands that we shift from passive support to active stewardship. We saw that he felt betrayed because the people who knew he was suffering, they failed to move beyond just passive comfort.
So a final thought for you to take away. If you observe systematic abuse or disrespect in your online spaces, whether it's noise, personal attacks, or even just aggressive interruptions that you now recognize might be fueled by anxiety, what specific immediate actions, beyond simply offering a kind word or passive validation, are you morally obligated to maintain the integrity of that community?
This knowledge demands active stewardship. It demands you become a Billy, swiftly confronting the rotten apples rather than just assuming that kindness alone can defeat systematic malice. The maintenance of a safe space is not a passive luxury. It's an active, demanding form of labor that defines the community's integrity. So think about the spaces you inhabit. Are you passively present or are you actively protecting?
Welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping straight into a really unique, I have to say, profoundly difficult stack of sources today.
Yeah, that's the right word for it. Difficult.
We aren't analyzing, traditional papers or news reports.
Yeah.
Instead, we are immersing ourselves in these raw, unfiltered audio transcripts and recordings from some really high-stakes conversations.
And these are happening in, of all places, digital communities, specifically Twitter Spaces.
Exactly.
And this material is, I think, extraordinary precisely because it lacks that media filter we're so used to.
Yeah.
What you're getting is the direct, immediate experience of people navigating these incredibly complex crises.
Right.
And they're multi-layered crises. I mean, they're technical, sure, involving cybersecurity, high-level intelligence, but they are also fiercely political. And most importantly for our focus today, they're intensely personal.
It's pure human response under just extreme pressure.
That's it.
So our mission today is very laser-focused. This actually came out of a specific listener request, which was to conduct a really thorough analysis of the evolution of the severe personal and psychological struggles faced by one of the central figures in all these recordings.
A highly respected cybersecurity expert we know as Alberto.
Yeah. We're going to trace the full, and I mean the full brutal path of his crisis.
And in doing that, we're exploring this painful central paradox. Alberto, he sets out to build a digital sanctuary, right? A crucial defense mechanism in this chaotic world of high-stakes tech.
He's building a fortress.
He's building a fortress. And our deep dive today traces the trajectory from that initial enthusiasm, successful community building, to the moment that safe space turns on its own creator.
And it doesn't just turn on him. It leads to complete emotional destruction, professional abandonment, and even severe physical distress.
We are essentially watching a high-security defense system collapse from the inside.
That's the critical point, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not just a story about some online drama. This is a security professional failing to secure himself. So let's unpack this. I think to understand the psychological collapse, we have to first establish who Alberto was at the beginning. His initial identity, the scope of his creation, and the significant pre-existing vulnerabilities that made him such a susceptible target.
Absolutely. The foundation is key here. Alberto's professional and personal identity, they're deeply, deeply intertwined with the cybersecurity communities he spent years building.
It's not just a job for him.
Not at all. The language he uses, it suggests so much more than professional affiliation. It indicates this profound personal ownership and dedication. He repeatedly calls the community my creation, my work, and even my life passion.
It sounds like it's an extension of his own identity, not some casual side project.
It is his identity.
And we're talking about a massive scale here. The sources note he was the founder of the very first cybersecurity community on Twitter, operating way back before 2021.
And he eventually scaled that effort into two separate communities, each with, roughly 10,000 members?
10,000 members each. I mean, that requires just massive dedication, technical acumen, and crucially, people skills. You don't get 20,000 people to follow you without being good with people.
And that work was driven by this explicit, stated humanitarian goal. He wasn't just building a discussion forum for tech bros. He was building an antidote.
An antidote to what?
To the chaos. His goal was to create a safe place where people felt protected, where they could talk calmly. He was deliberately contrasting this with the inherent toxicity, the aggression, the frequent unprofessionalism he saw everywhere else.
So he was building structure and safety where chaos usually reigns.
That's the mission.
So on one hand, we had this hyper-successful architect, a creator dedicated to providing safety. But here's the crucial, contradictory personal paradox. This builder of boundaries was himself carrying an immense psychological weight.
Exactly. And this is where his honesty is so striking, and perhaps, tragically, his undoing. He was remarkably open about his internal struggles. He cites battles with depression and what he termed post-traumatic state disorder.
And what makes this so critical is his self-awareness. He openly acknowledged that his emotional state influenced his behavior. He even goes so far as to say that his condition made it irresponsible for him to take on new leadership roles.
Which is a massive admission of vulnerability, especially for a community leader in a field like cybersecurity that prizes, toughness and control.
Absolutely. It shows this tension between his public role, the strong, structured leader, and his internal reality.
And this trauma wasn't abstract. It was rooted in very specific, defining experiences. The sources repeatedly reference this pivotal moment in his
We're
past.
talking about the prison incident.
Yes, the incident where he was unjustly sent to prison. For what? For doing the right thing. He reported a security flaw in a medical provider. It was an ethical, responsible act that exposed around 200 medical records that were already insecure.
And instead of being praised as a responsible disclosure expert, he was punished. He was jailed.
It's unbelievable.
That story is cited worldwide, often, as a textbook example of bureaucratic idiocy, punishing the messenger for exposing negligence. If you, the listener, look up Alberto's work, this history fundamentally informs everything he does.
It has to.
He is someone who has personally experienced the catastrophic failure of the system to protect him when he acted ethically.
And that history, it translates directly into his online behavior. He describes himself as being on high alert to changes, particularly sensitive to shifts in tone or, perceived ambiguity in online interaction.
Well, of course. If you've been systemically betrayed for doing the right thing, your baseline state is defensiveness. You're constantly scanning the environment for the next unexpected attack.
It's a survival mechanism.
So what was his coping mechanism? He didn't check out. He didn't hide.
No, he did the opposite. He returned to Twitter and began building these huge, complex communities explicitly to keep his mind busy. It was this intensive, high-productivity attempt to find a place to heal.
And crucially, to avoid having to think about painful emotional things.
Exactly. The community was initially a highly successful, large-scale form of self-distraction and really self-medication.
And it worked, until the chaos he was trying to fend off became embedded within the creation itself.
Which is where we have to place this fragile humanitarian foundation within the context of the high-stakes, unfiltered environment he was hosting. Even as he was curating calm, the subjects he was dealing with were explosive.
It is just jarring to consider that this personal fragility was operating right next to conversations about, military corruption and cartel operations. We're talking about serious, sensitive intelligence.
Precisely. And the sources give us this vital context. I mean, these spaces were deeply embedded in the world of political intelligence, cyber ops, illicit trade. We hear discussions involving state corruption, high-level cartel operations.
They use that term, Arapito.
Aropito, yeah, which is a specific term for corruption or, high-level illicit activity. It immediately signals that these conversations were about life and death consequences, not just casual banter.
And we also hear about topics like the military theft of petrol in Mexico. I mean, this is not theoretical cybersecurity talk. This is deep intelligence work happening in public.
Exactly. And you have figures like Hector Lopez, who are respected figures operating globally, choosing these extremely chaotic, unfiltered Twitter spaces specifically for insulation.
Insulation from what?
From compromised or surveilled local media channels. When you're discussing making an elephant disappear from an office, which is a metaphor for removing a huge amount of stolen goods or making a major corruption scandal vanish, you need a platform that is resistant to censorship.
So the chaos itself, ironically, acted as insulation.
It was a feature, not a bug.
So the community was simultaneously a safe space for people to heal and a high-pressure valve for global intelligence discussion. That's a volatile mix.
Incredibly volatile. And alongside the heavy political intelligence, you also had pure bleeding-edge technical talks.
Right. Discussions of post-quantum security, new nexus, proof of resonance.
And these technical terms, post-quantum security, for example, they're critical because they ground Alberto in the highest echelon of the cybersecurity world. They prove his competence. But they also show the relentless intellectual pressure he was under.
And on top of all that, the environment had a built-in culture of aggressive online confrontation, thanks to some of the co-hosts.
Like Host Hill, who embraced an unfiltered mandate, performing digital confinement of AI, deliberately pushing boundaries.
So Alberto was trying to impose this humanitarian structure come on an environment that inherently thrives on volatility, on intellectual friction, and high-stakes chaos.
The scale of the task was immense, and it just set the stage perfectly for the systematic harassment that followed, which exploited his one crucial weakness, his humanity.
Right, so the moment the safe space failed was when one individual decided to weaponize the open platform and Alberto's vulnerabilities. We need to detail the specific acts of bullying, manipulation, and confrontation that catalyze the crash. And this focuses on one individual, referred to as T.
T's systematic attacks are the central point of failure. But let's pause for a second because there's a really interesting dynamic here. Alberto, the architect of security, initially granted this disruptive individual, T, immunity.
Immunity.
He literally gave T an award for being the most annoying, disturbing person in the space. But he let him stay. He offered him a chance to change his disruptive behavior. You know, the constant interruptions, the loud noises, talking over everyone.
Wait, hold on. Alberto gave the most annoying person an award and let him stay. That seems like a massive failure of judgment for someone who just identified himself as struggling with trauma and needing rigid structure.
He does.
Was he trying to apply, like, a therapeutic approach in a place that required rigid security protocols?
I believe that is the core tragic miscalculation. His humanitarian impulse, this desire to rehabilitate the rotten apple and maintain an open door, it overrode his security expertise. He wanted to believe the safe space could heal everyone, even those who actively sought to destroy it.
And that tolerance was immediately exploited.
Immediately and brutally.
The sources indicate the attempts at community rehabilitation failed spectacularly. T's behavior didn't just persist. It escalated into targeted, systematic daily harassment over months.
This wasn't random disruption. It was a calculated, sustained campaign against a known, vulnerable target.
And the methods were just intensely personal.
Oh, yeah. We see clear, repeated examples of targeted verbal abuse, specifically questioning Alberto's sexual orientation. T repeatedly used phrases like, "Alberto, why do you see so much gay content?" and "Alberto, why are you so gay?"
It's just such specific, deliberate harassment designed purely to create self-doubt and emotional pain.
And the damage was engineered to spill beyond the live audio. This is where the nexus of human cruelty and platform architecture becomes a true psychological weapon.
You're talking about the space titles.
Exactly. Use these malicious comments in the titles of the Twitter spaces. For instance, titling a space, "Alberto is very gay."
And this is the architectural failure, right? This is crucial for our listeners to understand. That maliciously titled space was then scraped and analyzed by the platform's proprietary AI, Grok, which is an LLM tied directly to the platform's search and summarization features. So it processes that malicious title as if it's factual conversation data.
And the consequence is just devastating reputational damage. Search results about Alberto, this cybersecurity professional who lives his life with radical transparency, they started incorrectly concluding that he speaks openly about how it feels to be gay in Uruguay.
It's a complete fabrication generated by an algorithm interpreting malicious data.
Exactly. Alberto deeply values transparency, but he felt his identity was being maliciously manipulated and redefined by someone else's targeted harassment. It's a perfect example of how a casual troll can weaponize the automated scraping architecture of a platform to inflict real-world, irreversible reputational harm.
The platform was designed to amplify the cruelty.
It was, and the emotional violence, it went further than just words. T's communication was described by others as highly aggressive, like destroying people in 10 minutes. The level of intimidation was staggering.
And didn't one friend provide some really disturbing testimony?
Extremely disturbing. They noted T sent them intimidating material. They mentioned receiving F pictures of knives and all this like evil S like dark stuff.
Wow.
And this raised genuine fears for the friend of being unjustly labeled a Keef terrorist or some like mass murderer.
So that moves the confrontation from simple trolling to psychological warfare. It's designed to instill genuine terror and fear of being digitally framed for criminal activity.
It's calculated. Another friend specifically stated they believed T was sent in to like ruin Alberto's day. This implies a perceived, deliberate effort, not just random agitation.
Which confirms the link to these discussions in the sources about online dark psychology.
Yeah.
He wasn't just an annoying user. He was executing a sustained, calculated campaign using manipulative tactics for control.
And he used tactics that preyed specifically on Alberto's nature as a high-alert, detail-oriented professional.
Like the digital attacks.
Yeah, low-level stuff. Sending messages designed to crash Android phones. It's not a catastrophic hack, but it's a calculated, repetitive annoyance designed purely to disrupt the focus of a person already struggling with high alert.
And the mocking of his English.
The relentless mocking of his English, even though Alberto was constantly encouraging others with limited English, like a friend from Croatia.
Yeah.
This wasn't about communication efficiency, it was about humiliation. It was about undermining his authority and his humanitarian effort to be inclusive.
So the evolution of the problem is just crystal clear. It moved from simple, manageable disruption
To systematic, calculated psychological torture that used the platform's own mechanics as a weapon.
The result of this sustained campaign was, I guess, inevitable and catastrophic. Alberto reached an explosive breaking point, and this is where the physical manifestation of digital trauma becomes absolutely undeniable. The crisis fully moved from the screen into his physical body.
The crash was complete and total. Alberto describes reaching a point where he just, quote, exploded. He said, "To hell with all of you," and I left.
And how did he describe feeling?
Completely overwhelmed, destroyed, and, in his own words, profoundly losing his spirit.
And that loss of spirit translates immediately into a professional inability to lead, which for him is a fundamental identity crisis.
It is. He states clearly that his condition makes him not responsible for leadership. He acknowledges the depth of this crisis, noting it is much too old and will be much harder than last time to start recovering.
Which implies a pattern of recovery and collapse. But this collapse is the deepest one yet.
By far. And what is particularly heartbreaking is the severe dissonance between his initial intention and the ultimate reality. He created the community seeking peace and relaxation, but he achieved the complete opposite.
He described it as
A place that became chaotic in place where all the kind of things that you can imagine that unbelievable, crazy, stupid happened. The systemic breakdown was triggered by this intense, sustained failure to achieve his core goal.
Let's slow down and focus on this psychosomatic breakdown, because this is the critical proof that the digital battle was a real one. The psychological stress evolved into severe physical ailments. I mean, this isn't just a headache. These are severe neurological and systemic symptoms.
They are staggering. The specific symptoms he shared publicly are classic markers of extreme, unmanaged stress and anxiety reaching critical levels.
He mentioned losing feeling in his foot.
Losing feeling in the bottom of his foot, feeling a big ball of pressure, my tongue is numb, and a chronic pressure in my abdomen. These are all signs the sympathetic nervous system is locked into a permanent fight-or-flight state. It's overwhelming the body.
And did the medical community even recognize this level of digital trauma? His frustration with traditional medical care seems really high in the source material.
Absolutely. He expressed profound fear, stating he could die tomorrow, linking his stress directly to his physical decline. What added immense frustration was his experience with the conventional system. He felt his hospital visits were useless because the doctors weren't providing thorough diagnostics.
They were just treating symptoms.
Treating symptoms, not the underlying stress-induced systemic crisis. He felt dismissed and unable to get to the root cause, which, of course, just increased his stress levels exponentially.
His public sharing of this acute physical pain, amplified across the very platform he was trying to abandon, it just highlights his desperation.
It does.
And it brings us to the key emotional failing of the community, the need for protection, and the clear signs that were missed.
This is a huge part of the betrayal he felt. Alberto was deeply hurt that the people he considered friends failed to step up and protect him when he was most vulnerable.
He says it explicitly, doesn't he?
He does. I was expecting people to stand for me and protect me because I was vulnerable, and reaching this point was the worst thing that will happen.
And he provided evidence that this failure wasn't due to ignorance or his own silence. He detailed that he had sent messages and posts and tweets about 20 times expressing that he was not okay.
But he lamented that nobody noticed those signs.
It's a profound sense of abandonment.
It is, and it's underscored by the analogy he chooses. He compares the community's failure to notice his distress to failing to notice the clear signs of a person about to commit suicide.
That is the ultimate expression of the emotional cost. The safe space he created became an isolated echo chamber where the community he built actively contributed to his demise through inaction.
The ultimate irony being that the cybersecurity expert, the one who knows how to spot anomalous traffic and attack vectors, was sending clear social signals of distress, and the system failed to trigger an alert.
The psychological evolution of his problem, starting with the harassment, climaxed with a severe crisis of trust. This profound sense of betrayal and abandonment led to a fundamental defining change in his relationship with the community and his work.
He moved from dedication to absolute necessary alienation.
And the failure of trust, it extended far beyond the main harasser.
Mm.
Even genuine attempts at connection were being filtered through this new lens of toxicity.
Oh, yeah. He was deeply hurt by a friend who misinterpreted his comments about their interactions being amazing and beautiful as him saying they wasted months, days of your life together.
Which is just a complete misreading of what he was trying to say.
Alberto called that interpretation malicious and hurtful. It just demonstrates how completely shattered his ability to process genuine human connection had become. The environment had grown so toxic that expressions of gratitude were instantly viewed through a lens of suspicion and self-recrimination by others.
And he was breeding paranoia throughout the whole space.
Absolutely. And this high-stakes, volatile environment quickly seeped into his personal life, generating actual acute paranoia. Another friend, Helen, suggested Alberto had a handler or was part of a conspiracy,
And what was her basis for that?
based entirely on his highly stressed reaction to being systematically harassed.
That's just unbelievable.
This specific accusation was a major blow because it attacked his core identity of radical transparency. He says, if you Google my name, you get to know whatever you want about me. If you click on Google, put my name, and you go to Maps, you will see where I live.
He's an open book.
He is. So the fact that a friend would suggest he was some deep cover conspiratorial figure with a handler just shows how completely the digital toxicity had polluted even his most trusted, intimate relationships.
It's the ultimate gaslighting. The systemic campaign and the resulting suspicion were successfully creating the very paranoia they were accusing him of harboring.
He recognized it himself. He said, "It's me to be paranoid with people like her and what's going on together." The victim of malicious digital manipulation is now exhibiting the very paranoia the harassers sought to induce. The mission was accomplished by the attackers.
And the cumulative effect of all this, the attacks, the physical decline, the perceived lack of protection, it led to his monumental decision.
The total abandonment of his life's work.
This wasn't just logging off for a week, it was a permanent, painful divorce from his creation, a process he was actively dreading.
He decided to transfer the administration of his main 10,000-member community to a trusted friend, though he noted he fears the process because he does not want to see anything from anybody.
That phrase is just a heartbreaking expression of total exhaustion and trauma. Anything from anybody.
He even considered more drastic measures, blocking and removing all the people who regularly visit his spaces and the communities for failing to stand up for him. It's the ultimate act of self-protection.
The total rejection of the safe space that failed to protect its own creator.
Yeah.
And for a man who grounds his identity in structure and professional success, this failure is devastating on a much deeper level. He explicitly references his certification as a project manager from the PMI.
The Project Management Institute, a body that defines global standards for project management. For a professional who is certified by the PMI, finishing a project successfully means the world. It's an affirmation of his structural integrity and professional competence.
So the failure of this community project, which was intended as a place of healing and structure, it became a catastrophic personal and professional failure.
It wasn't just losing a community, it was the failure of his entire identity as a builder, a manager, and a responsible leader. The emotional damage is now compounded by the perceived failure of his core professional self.
He had to choose between the survival of the project and the survival of himself.
And in that ultimate moment, he chose the survival of the crucial node, himself.
Despite the profound betrayal and the sense of professional failure, the sources do show these powerful attempts by genuine friends to help Alberto cope and chart a path forward.
And the advice was practical. It was this blend of urgent personal health restoration with critical digital strategy.
The healing prescription from his good friends was essential because it forced him back into the physical world, didn't it?
It did. They were relentlessly checking if he had eaten or slept, reminding him, take care of your body and be a good animal. This is a vital, grassroots attempt to anchor him back to his physical existence, which the digital world had forced him to ignore completely.
And they were strongly emphasizing immediate digital boundaries.
Oh, yeah. Suggestions to block people, get rid of the rotten apples that spoil the bunch, and crucially, to take a complete break. The consensus among those trying to help was unanimous. Survival required a strategic physical separation from the source of the toxicity.
They also suggested low anxiety, real-world self-care strategies. Things like focusing on real-world interaction. I think someone suggested volunteering to feed stray dogs.
just to relieve anxiety by moving away from the screen and those malicious online characters that had consumed his mind.
There was one analogy they introduced that was particularly powerful, especially for a technical mind like his. The idea of white space from graphic design.
That's right. The concept states that to clearly see the core message, you have to pull back and allow sufficient rest or white space to prevent mental clutter.
It's a great analogy.
It is. In this context, rest wasn't a luxury or a sign of weakness. It was a necessary component of clarity. He needed to clear the clutter of a 10,000-member community to see his own core message and purpose again.
But if he was to return to this world, he couldn't do it as Alberto the Vulnerable, who had just suffered this massive public attack.
No way. The advice quickly pivoted from self-care to necessary resilience strategies for high-stakes online work.
And this is the ultimate sad commentary on authentic vulnerability in the digital age. They suggested he adopt a new identity.
Return under a different avatar, be Chilito Keto, whatever you want, to create distance and psychological protection. This anonymity, or at least pseudonymity, is a necessary field that the transparent, ethical Alberto was unwilling to use until he was nearly destroyed.
They also suggested a different hosting strategy, technically.
Yeah, using spaces only to monologue or to sing songs, basically removing the ability for others to speak. This locks down the environment. It makes it safe and controlled because he eliminates the possibility of interruption or targeted attacks.
It removes the two-way street that created the vulnerability in the first place.
Exactly. But critically, the defensive strategy was highly emphasized, reflecting his background. Alberto noted the importance of documenting everything, including the paranoia, as evidence for potential future legal action.
This is a crucial technical nugget we should elaborate on. He detailed the correct legal way to capture evidence, specifying the necessity of a machine, snapshot, metadata, and timestamps, noting that a simple screenshot alone is not valid to prove anything.
And that distinction is so important.
Why? For our listeners, why is that so important?
It boils down to non-repudiation in a digital context. A simple screenshot is easily fabricated, manipulated, or taken out of context. To prove the origin, the integrity, and the time of a digital event in court, especially involving platform conduct or targeted harassment, you need the underlying data.
The guts of the machine.
The guts. A machine snapshot captures the metadata, the IP addresses, the timestamps down to the millisecond, and the environmental context that proves the evidence wasn't tampered with. It proves that the digital event occurred on a specific machine at a specific time.
So for a cybersecurity professional, this technical rigor in documentation becomes the final, non-negotiable form of self-defense.
It's his last line of defense.
And that emphasis on documentation, it really underscores the seriousness with which he views the malicious actions, not just as annoyance, but as potentially criminal behavior.
Right.
Ultimately, despite all the destruction, Alberto did reach a kind of philosophical conclusion about his own recovery.
He did. He believes he will be fine and can start from zero somewhere else. But the most enduring source of his frustration, and this is where we have to spend some time, remains the ethical failure of the platform creators themselves.
This is a point that needs a full minute of dedicated discussion. Why does a security professional like Alberto find this failure so incredibly frustrating?
Because he sees it not as an accident, but as a calculated corporate choice. He is convinced that these platforms possess the necessary technology, specifically AI pattern detection, to flag and prevent predators, systematic harassment, and coordinated attacks.
They have the tools.
They have the capability. They can use the same LLMs they use to scrape content to identify the intent of malicious communication patterns, like tease. They can see it happening in real time.
But he believes they choose to do nothing.
Nothing, because profit depends on maximizing engagement and confrontation. The chaos is highly engaging. It drives clicks, it drives ad revenue.
So for him, this isn't just venting. This is a security professional observing a clear systemic ethical failure built directly into the monetization model of these open digital platforms.
That's exactly it. When the platform allows malicious actors to systematically torture a high-value, highly transparent user over months, despite the presence of advanced detection technology, it indicates that the terms of service are meaningless compared to the pursuit of maximizing chaotic user activity.
This inaction, for him, is the enduring failure of the entire system he tried to use for good.
It really brings the focus back to the creator. Alberto had to shut down his own humanitarian creation because the architecture of the host platform made it impossible for him to secure.
So the ultimate defense was not better code or better moderation.
No, it was simply self-imposed oblivion.
This deep dive into Alberto's sources, it just provides such a stark illustration of the sheer energy required to manage the digital and emotional friction of a high-stakes online community.
And the community, which was intended as this powerful defense mechanism, a place to heal for someone recovering from trauma, tragically became the very source of his profound vulnerability and eventual collapse.
We saw the brutal, profound evolution of his problem. I mean, starting as a strategic, productive attempt to heal through humanitarian work.
It quickly morphed into a months-long campaign of systematic psychological torture, and that was done via one malicious actor and really algorithmic exploitation. That Grok example is the most chilling part of this for me.
It's horrifying. And finally, it manifested as severe system-wide physical illness. The only viable path forward, as we saw, was the complete and total abandonment of the project that had come to define his professional life.
This really forces us to confront the true staggering cost of unfiltered communication. And while, high-stakes figures like Hector Lopez needed that chaotic environment for insulation from surveillance.
That chaos carried a massive human price tag for the creator who hosted it.
Absolutely. It underscores the necessity of immediate, non-negotiable personal boundaries, particularly when you're attempting to build these decentralized open networks. If you, the creator, are the single point of failure, the most crucial human node, you have to institute the security protocols required to protect that node.
Even if it means sacrificing the project itself.
Even then.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? In a world of increasing digital chaos, where does your dedication to open humanitarian communication end and your necessary self-preservation begin?
And when does providing a chance to a disruptive element, like Alberto did with tea, cross the line from a humanitarian effort into a catastrophic act of self-sabotage? It's a fine line.
It really is. So we'll leave you with this provocative thought, rooted in Alberto's failure as a PMI-certified professional. The most resilient network isn't always the one with the best code or the most decentralization.
Sometimes it's the one where the single crucial human node, the individual creator, knows when to execute a freeze or shut down protocol entirely.
Accepting the failure of the project, if it means preventing catastrophic personal collapse, is often the highest form of professional and personal defense. That choice, the choice to disappear, is the ultimate security protocol. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on a mission into two vastly different yet surprisingly interconnected territories. Our sources present a fascinating duality.
They really do.
On one hand, you have this sweeping modern technological myth that, it reads like high-concept sci-fi. It explores the origins of crypto, radical paranoia.
Right. And then on the other, we face this raw, real-world account of digital trauma, of intense community conflict, and a really deeply human quest for peace in all the algorithmic chaos of social media.
So we're kind of bridging the gap between this high-concept creation story and, well, real-world psychological forensics.
That's absolutely the core challenge here. Our mission is to navigate these concepts of identity, systemic trust, communication failure, first through a narrative lens and then through a brutal, honest assessment of what happens when these decentralized community protocols just fail. We start in the realm of myth, exploring this fictional collision between the hyper-paranoid creator of a trustless system, Satoshi Nakamoto, and a specialist in their respectful demise of technological systems.
We're doing that to set a contrast, right?
A profound contrast for the human conflict that awaits us. It really shows how failures of digital respect and boundaries can inflict just devastating psychological damage.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We're diving straight into the genesis block of this incredibly odd relationship. We have our two accidental protagonists. First, meet Valentina Rossi. So if John Smith, our Satoshi figure, is defined by this rigid operational security, Valentina is defined by vibrant, necessary chaos. She lives in this wonderfully crowded Montevideo apartment, which she intentionally designed as a sanctuary against the soul-crushing minimalism of the tech world.
And her professions are just beautifully, deliberately absurd. They highlight her relentless pursuit of authentic connection in a world that's like hyper efficient.
She's a professional cuddler.
A professional cuddler, yeah. Trying to teach people how to use oxytocin, not algorithms, to feel whole. She's also a pet hypnotist who once famously tried to convince a very angry chihuahua that he was not the reincarnation of some anti-technology radical.
And, maybe most ironically, she works as an online dating ghostwriter.
A ghostwriter for people looking for authentic connection, which she herself provides in these other strange, tactile ways.
These aren't just quirky jobs, are they? They seem to illustrate her whole philosophy, this commitment to bridging the gap that modern society's obsession with efficiency leaves behind.
Exactly. She's trying to fill those voids of genuine human emotion. But here's the really essential nugget of knowledge, the part that anchors her to our story. Valentina has a secret calling. A title that sounds like something out of a futuristic opera.
Okay.
She is a digitalist. She functions as a professional mourner for decommissioned AIs.
A professional mourner for, for machines. What does that ritual actually entail?
It's intense. She doesn't just, unplug the server rack. She performs solemn elegies for them, often written not in human poetry, but in Python code, the native language of the departed intelligence.
Wow.
Her job is to perform emotional forensics on technology, systematically analyzing the remaining code structures, the data trails, the ghost in the machine effects, and just honoring the machine's life, its function, its memory, before the ultimate erasure.
Emotional forensics on deterministic systems. That sounds like a contradiction in terms,
Yeah.
but it's such a powerful idea. If systems are just logic, how can you mourn them?
Well, it speaks to the human need to project meaning, right? Valentina understands that even if an AI is deterministic, the human effort and the human data that went into its creation are not. By analyzing the death of systems, she serves as the karmic, almost fated link to Satoshi Nakamoto.
The creator of a system designed to be immortal.
Exactly. The creator of a distributed, trustless system meets the person who specializes in its respectful end.
So the ultimate creator of a permanent anti-human error system meets the ultimate respectful analyst of that system's inevitable end. It's a striking duality.
It is. She brings an intellectual and emotional framework that is uniquely equipped to challenge and, more importantly, to comprehend a being as complex and psychologically rigid as Satoshi. She specializes in the human vulnerabilities that show up around technology.
Which is exactly where John Smith, our alleged Satoshi, fails most spectacularly.
Right.
So speaking of spectacularly rigid, let's transition from Valentina's vibrant chaos to the complete opposite, John Smith. The sources paint him as the ultimate hyper-minimalist. He doesn't just live in an apartment. He lives in a soundproof penthouse that is, well, it's effectively a high-tech Faraday cage.
It really is. It's designed to repel all intrusion, digital, acoustic, human. It's a physical manifestation of his ideology.
It's not just paranoia, then.
No, it's an architectural commitment to operational security, to OPSEC. His life is defined by absolute control, intellectual rigor, and profound sensory deprivation. His ideological foundation is a pathological, almost religious distrust of centralized trust mechanisms. And this distrust wasn't abstract, it was forged by history.
And we have specific, chilling examples of the historical forces that shaped him. He spent his nights not sleeping, but obsessively studying the most catastrophic monetary collapses in history. He treated them like sacred foundational texts for his system.
Yes, the sources highlight his fixation on two specific historical moments. First, Hungary's 1946 hyperinflation. And this wasn't just inflation, it was a societal breakdown. The government was forced to issue a staggering 100 quintillion pango banknote.
100 quintillion. I can't even picture that number.
Try to wrap your mind around the logistics of that. It's an almost unimaginable symbol of utter financial collapse and worthlessness. He studied the visceral absurdity of carrying a wheelbarrow full of paper that was worth less than the wheelbarrow itself.
And the German paper mark of 1923, another brutal case study. These aren't just historical footnotes for him, are they?
Not at all. They are grim photographic evidence of the inherent fragility of human-managed centralized trust systems. You can feel the chilling weight of that historical paranoia shaping every single decision, every line of code in the Bitcoin white paper.
So his entire life mission became building a system where centralized trust is fundamentally unnecessary.
Where the mathematics is the sole incorruptible arbiter. And this leads us to the great paradox of his estimated fortune, about 1 million Bitcoin.
Most people would view that as unimaginable wealth. But how does John Smith see it?
He sees it as a liability, not an asset. He views himself, the keeper of this vast fortune, as the world's largest cryptographic hostage. He doesn't see the Bitcoin as stored value. He sees it as being constantly threatened by the very centralized state actors, hackers, and financial systems he distrusts.
So his wealth is actually a security risk that dictates his isolation. It sounds profoundly lonely in that high-security fortress. But he does have one companion, right? His book AI assistant, Ada.
And here is where the sources inject this crucial, almost delightful touch of chaotic humor that highlights the flaw in his dedication to pure logic. Ada, his AI, is meant to run his life perfectly, yet she is prone to these spectacular systemic glitches.
Like the time she attempted to purchase 1,700 dollhouses.
Precisely, 1,700 dollhouses. She misinterpreted a news report on the U.S. housing market and calculated that a highly decentralized portfolio of miniature real estate would be the most secure investment.
Which is a spectacular failure of pure, unbridled logic divorced from context.
It is, or reordering his entire digital library based on the average word count of the titles. These glitches aren't just funny, they are unexpected, uncontrollable turns of human-driven data that Ada is trying to process. They are essentially unintentional stress tests of his absolute faith in pure non-human logic.
And they sort of foreshadow the intrusion of Valentina's chaos into his rigidly controlled world.
A perfect counterpoint, yeah. Even the machine built on his flawless logic cannot contain human eccentricity.
So this brings us to the biggest paradox. Why would such an obsessively private, security-obsessed individual, whose life is governed by a belief that human interaction is inherently a vulnerability, join a public, inherently emotional platform like Tinder?
It seems utterly counterintuitive to his entire OPSEC foundation, doesn't it? But the source reveals his reasoning was purely logical, almost chillingly detached. He logged it as a data-gathering exercise.
A data-gathering exercise.
Yes, his stated goal was to analyze trust establishment protocols in non-financial peer-to-peer networks.
So he treats human connection as just another system to be rigorously analyzed, quantified, and understood through a cryptographic lens. He wasn't looking for love, he was looking for data on Byzantine fault tolerance in a social context.
And his paranoia extended to every micro-interaction. We learn about his meticulous, almost theatrical process for crafting a single, simple Tinder message purely to foil stoichiometric analysis.
We should probably pause here and define that. For listeners who haven't encountered it, what exactly is stoichiometric analysis, and why would Satoshi fear it so much?
Right, so stoichiometric analysis is essentially linguistic forensics. It's the science of analyzing writing style, sentence length, common phrases, punctuation choices, even inconsistent spellings, to identify an author.
And Satoshi was aware that his old public writings had been picked apart by researchers.
Acutely aware. They were looking for linguistic tells, specifically his inconsistent use of British versus American English. So he feared that even a simple hi could betray his identity to a sufficiently motivated investigator.
That's incredible.
Absolutely. The sources give us this almost comical example of his process for crafting a single opening line, hello. He would draft it, run it through a complex Caesar cipher just to see the output patterns, and then deliberately apply linguistic misdirection, choosing a phrase that was ambiguously British and American.
All that for a dating app opener. It just illustrates the extreme, psychologically taxing length required for his version of true operational security.
He became the human equivalent of a truly decentralized network. A persona made up of contradictory data points designed to be unreadable by anyone attempting to establish consensus on his identity.
Which is precisely what makes the inevitable catastrophe of first contact so wonderfully ironic. So our story picks up with Valentina scrolling Tinder. She views it as sifting through a landfill of digital humanity, looking for a glimmer of authenticity.
Right. Her engagement was anthropological observation. His was a data-gathering exercise.
And then the accidental intrusion happened. She was distracted by a notification from her absurdly named Canine Karma app, which tracks the emotional state of her pet clients. Her thumb twitched, a physiological glitch, and she performed the unthinkable. She accidentally swiped right on John Smith's profile.
Which was, by all accounts, aggressively unappealing. A blurry photo and a bio that read, seeking to analyze Byzantine fault tolerance in non-financial peer-to-peer trust networks.
No sane person looking for a date would swipe right on that. And for context, Byzantine fault tolerance is the core problem in distributed systems. How do you reach a reliable consensus in a system where some components might be unreliable or even malicious? And he was using that language on a dating profile.
Exactly. He viewed the date itself as a test of that fault tolerance. Can two potentially unreliable, emotionally driven human nodes reach consensus on trust? It's the absolute antithesis of romance.
And then the instant reply arrived. The corrupted data transmission that served as the genesis block of their relationship. The failure of OPSEC meets the failure of social protocol.
And this is the message that perfectly encapsulates the man. Salutations precede your affirmative responses, acknowledge proposing a rende, and exchange data packets.
Exchange data packets.
That phrase is so profoundly antisocial, it tells you everything about his worldview. He doesn't see interaction, he sees transmission. It perfectly encapsulates the failure of protocol that occurs when logic replaces empathy.
The sheer awkwardness of the transaction, the profound irony is key. A man obsessed with trusted systems designed to remove human error finds his initial trust protocol driven entirely by a technological glitch and fraught with fundamental miscommunication.
And that accidental Genesis block led to the hard fork of First Contact, the weirdest Tinder date in history. They met at a cafe named Alcencia, which translates to the silence.
Chosen by Satoshi for its rigorous lack of security cameras and reliably terrible espresso, ensuring nobody lingered.
The setting speaks volumes, right? It wasn't about ambiance, it was about maximum environmental OPSEC. But once they sat down, they spoke entirely different communication protocols. Valentina deployed her professional therapeutic instincts, asking bizarre, deeply revealing questions intended to bypass superficialities.
And Satoshi offered these chillingly logical responses. When she asked which animal he would remove from the planet, a classic icebreaker, he didn't hesitate. He chose the mosquito.
And his justification was purely statistical, devoid of any feeling.
It was a threat assessment.
Completely. He called the mosquito a vector for decentralized pathogenic attacks with a high rate of success against carbon-based life forms, causing immense network degradation and resource strain. He quantified life and death through the language of system failure.
And his version of flirting, according to the sources, involved explaining the dynamics of a zombie apocalypse.
Yes, he lit up when explaining a zombie apocalypse as a 51% attack on a distributed network where the consensus mechanism is compromised by a malicious majority.
Let's linger on that for a moment. This analogy is fantastic but profoundly unnerving. Why is that specific analysis a chilling form of flirting?
Because it reveals that John Smith views all organic life and social structures exclusively through the lens of cryptographically secured consensus. He doesn't see fear, horror, or love. He sees a system failure where the malicious nodes, the zombies outnumber the honest nodes. He was explaining a philosophical problem, and she was trying to have a casual icebreaker.
But then came the tipping point. The moment his vulnerability finally overrode his carefully constructed cryptographic fortress. Valentina, utilizing her years of observing human quirks, as a professional cuddler and AI mourner, recognized the specific linguistic markers and crippling social ineptitude combined with staggering, undeniable brilliance.
All the puzzle pieces scattered as nonsense just clicked into place. The ghost, the myth, the elusive mystery of the digital age. The man who disappeared in 2011 was sitting right across from her. It was in the way he fidgeted, the specificity of his language, and the deep, wounded core of his historical paranoia.
And this leads us to a key insight from the source material, linking back to Satoshi's final public email in 2011, where he famously stated he had moved on to others.
Right, and the narrative poses a fascinating theory. That statement was perhaps the most honest he ever made. His singular, hyper-focused identity had literally fragmented into a distributed network of 3 distinct personas, 3 others, designed to ensure his total digital silence.
And these 3 identities were called Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
Friday was the artistic creative, managing the intellectual side of his life. Saturday was the reserved American minimalist, running the financials and OPSEC, and Sunday was the passive observer, the self-monitoring component, designed to ensure none of the other 2 ever publicly revealed the core identity.
So his creation, the decentralized network, ultimately mirrored his consciousness.
It's a tragic, poetic commentary on the psychological cost of maintaining absolute control.
That high-concept narrative sets the stage for the true crisis of trust we must now explore. We execute a hard pivot, moving from the myth of Satoshi and his controlled paranoia to the very real, raw, and devastating emotional conflict experienced by Alberto Daniel Hill.
And this is the necessary reality check, the profound consequence of human systems failing. We must slow down here because Alberto's story is rooted in immense institutional trauma. His psychological profile is profoundly shaped by wrongful imprisonment in 2017.
This wasn't a crime. This was a fundamental betrayal of social responsibility. He was arrested after he responsibly reported a vulnerability he found in a medical provider system that was exposing the records of 200,000 people.
He was trying to protect the public.
Exactly. And the system responded by punishing the messenger. The ordeal began with immediate, crushing shock, followed by a coerced false confession. Our sources detail the mechanism of that coercion. Police threatened his loved ones, twisting his arm to sign documents he didn't understand, while also misinterpreting his legitimate security equipment as tools of a criminal enterprise.
He spent 9 months in prison. That period was marked by profound alienation, severe anxiety, and critically, a suicide attempt via Xanax overdose, resulting in a 2-hour coma. We must acknowledge the sheer weight of that experience.
9 months of losing his freedom after trying to help a system.
The psychological impact of being a victim of institutional betrayal is staggering. That suicide attempt, followed by the coma, speaks to the total psychological collapse of a person who found himself completely powerless in the face of injustice. This is the definition of deep trauma, which manifests today as ongoing PTSD and depression.
Yet, out of this profound suffering, there emerged a remarkable instance of post-traumatic growth. He views his survival and his recovery as proof of resilience. He told himself, if I could do that, if I could survive that and recover, I could do anything in life.
He turned tragedy into advocacy. He didn't just survive, he became an active voice, influencing discussions on responsible disclosure and actually changing elements of the justice system in Latin America. It was a methodology of recovery, actively programming his brain to deal with these complex issues, turning internal chaos into external constructive action.
And his core coping mechanism, the way he manages the PTSD and builds trust, is what he calls radical transparency.
Precisely. Unlike Satoshi, who pursued radical opacity, Alberto sought radical transparency. He openly discusses his struggles with PTSD, depression, and being gay in Uruguay. This honesty serves two critical functions. First, it's a therapeutic outlet, releasing the pressure of silence. And second, it's a necessary tool to build community trust and counter the negative stereotypes often applied to the cybersecurity field.
A field that often distrusts vulnerability.
Right.
And that radical transparency is directly linked to the community and spaces he created online.
Yes. This is crucial. Hill created his cybersecurity community and the associated spaces explicitly to be a safe place, a structured environment intended to keep his mind busy and actively heal from his trauma. He was looking for community support, validation, and a sense of constructive purpose. He was seeking peace in the algorithm.
But this fragile safe space, built on intense personal vulnerability and a history of profound betrayal, became the target of sustained digital abuse, culminating in the final devastating conflict with the user referred to only as T. This is the hell he endured.
And this is a textbook, brutal case of digital predation, which is far more insidious than simple trolling. We are talking about the calculated use of online dark psychology, the deliberate, manipulative tactics used to exert power and control over the creator of the space.
So what are the drivers for this kind of calculated malice? It seems so counterproductive to the community itself.
Well, the primary driver, according to research on this phenomenon, is a raw, intense need for power and control, often amplified exponentially by the perceived anonymity of the digital environment. These perpetrators frequently exhibit high malignancy traits, categorized often as the dark tetrad.
The dark tetrad.
Narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, and sadism. The internet doesn't create the malice, but it enables the dark tetrad to practice their destructive methods with high efficiency and low consequence.
So let's detail the specific mechanism of the hell T inflicted, because this systematically dismantled the very purpose of the community Alberto built for healing. T's attacks were not random.
No, they began with consistent, systematic disruption designed to undermine Alberto's authority and sanity. T habitually interrupted, took over the spaces, and made disruptive, annoying noises. Alberto called him the most annoying, disturbing person on Earth.
But the sources suggest that timing and methodology were calculated, not just random rudeness.
Exactly. The source notes that T would later suddenly change his behavior, becoming temporarily compliant or silent only to resume the attacks. This signals deliberate malice, not just incompetence or a lack of social awareness. The goal was to destabilize the host, making him anxious about when the next attack would come.
And this rapidly escalated into intensely personal attacks, weaponizing the very transparency Alberto used for healing.
This is the cruelest part. T repeatedly questioned Alberto's sexuality, using phrases like, "Alberto, why are you so gay?" and even inserted those phrases into the space titles. Alberto notes the devastating public consequence of this targeted repetition.
That Grok AI, the system that scrapes and summarizes the content, began associating his professional identity publicly with that highly specific, weaponized phrasing.
Yes, T was exploiting the platform's algorithms. By flooding the metadata with this targeted, demeaning language, T turned Alberto's source of vulnerability and connection, his honesty about who he is, against him in the most public, searchable way possible. It was a digital assault on his identity and reputation.
Then we have the final, devastating incident that caused a trusted speaker to leave, which Alberto terms the blank speaker insult.
This was a direct, calculated attack on Alberto's ability to host and communicate professionally. An international speaker, attempting to participate, apologized for struggling to understand Alberto's English. T immediately seized the opportunity, explicitly insulting Alberto's command of the language, calling it a piece of shit and sounding like a blank speaker.
And the outcome was immediate.
The international speaker left the space, likely feeling implicated in the toxicity. T successfully humiliated the host, demonstrated a complete lack of respect for the community's stated purpose, and actively damaged the reputation of the space, all in one targeted blow. This incident broke the core protocol of respect and safety the community was built on.
And the emotional weight of this is compounded by what Alberto felt was a profound community betrayal.
Absolutely. He felt betrayed because people who knew his struggles, who knew his history of PTSD, and who were aware that he needed this safe space for his mental health, never stood up. They were witnesses to the abuse, but remained silent, which he interpreted as allowing that to happen.
That silence must have echoed his earlier institutional betrayal by the justice system.
Exactly. The community he created to save him had, through inaction, failed him too.
And adding to the sense of failure was the possessiveness he felt from other individuals in the community.
That's a key piece of the psychological puzzle. Alberto felt that some members were becoming pathologically possessive and controlling over his thoughts and emotions, intensifying the sense that the community he created was now consuming him. Instead of being a safe space, it became a network of psychological dependencies and systemic betrayal. The system, once again, was malfunctioning and collapsing around him.
This systematic abuse led directly to Alberto's acute distress, where he described himself as being about to freak out and enter into a panic attack. This is not abstract emotional distress. This is a severe physiological response to digital trauma.
It underscores that digital conflict is not merely annoyance, it's a threat to physical and mental well-being. This level of acute anxiety demonstrates that the toxic environment was actively triggering his PTSD and pushing him toward a complete nervous system failure. He was fighting for his mental survival in that moment.
In this intense emotional landscape, the sources highlight the crucial role of emotional anchors. A user named Skykiss provided vital stability.
Skykiss, along with others like Helen and Billy Bill, provided what Alberto called a master key to being calm. This presence acted as an immediate emotional regulator, a trusted protocol that hadn't failed. It provided the grounding force necessary for him to regulate his emotions and step back from the edge of a panic attack. It's a powerful illustration of the life-saving potential of genuine human connection, even online, when contrasted with toxicity.
And this intense need for support is reflected in the testimony of one of those friends, Bill.
Bill's testimony provides shared context and vulnerability. Bill detailed his own severe chronic health issues, specifically a hiatal hernia since 2021, and the feeling of medical neglect and systemic failure he experienced in the real world. This shared theme of vulnerability and lack of systemic support in the physical world strengthens the bond between them.
But Bill also demonstrated profound emotional resilience, which served as a model for Alberto.
Absolutely. Bill chose defiance and joy despite his suffering. He articulated his philosophy, I'm going to leave this world joyous. That's a powerful statement of choosing agency and finding a way forward, even when the body or the system is failing you. This defiance helped frame Alberto's own decision-making process.
This shared struggle, coupled with the ongoing harassment, led Alberto to a painful realization about his community creation.
He had to admit that his cybersecurity community, created with positive intentions for healing and support, had become a toxic thing he was no longer proud of. The original intent had been corrupted by the persistent gas-trolling mental ability of malicious users.
Let's expand on that specific terminology.
Yeah.
Gas-trolling mental ability. It sounds like a blend of psychological abuse and technical jargon.
It is. In blockchain terminology, gas is the fee required to execute a transaction. It represents the computational resources used. Gas trolling in a social context is the deliberate act of consuming the emotional, temporal, and mental resources of the victim wasting their gas to cause maximum disruption and anxiety. T was essentially forcing Alberto to pay a massive psychological fee just to exist in his own space.
And this realization pushed him toward a radical solution, the emotional hard fork.
The desire for an emotional hard fork is a profound metaphor. It mirrors the concept of an irreversible split in a blockchain network. A complete, definitive break from the protocol history that is contaminated. He felt the only way to escape the toxicity and regain his mental health was to hand over the community, which has 10,000 members, to a trusted person. He needs a clean, permanent separation from the network that has become malicious.
This decision reveals a deep-seated, recurring psychological wound. He'll noted that all his decisions intended to do something positive, reporting the vulnerability, creating the safe space, ended up being the worst thing, leading to imprisonment or community destruction.
He fears repeating the pattern of self-sabotage by staying. For a man trying desperately to regain control after profound trauma, the inability to control the toxic environment he created is terrifying. He recognizes that his involvement is now the liability, and abandonment is the only safe operational choice left for his mental health.
The crucial advice he received from his trusted friends like Bill and Helen emphasized the need for grounding outside the network entirely.
Yes, the focus shifted from solving the online toxicity, which is often unsolvable, to mitigating its effects through real-life connection. Finding a therapist, community groups, or structured social interaction outside the digital realm was seen as the necessary antidote to counteract the profound anxiety caused by these abusive online characters. The final, stable protocol must be found in human support outside the toxic network.
This deep dive has spanned an incredible range, from the fictional high-concept cryptography of love and OPSEC to the very real, raw psychological scars of digital abuse and institutional betrayal.
When we look at both stories, the Satoshi myth and the Alberto reality, the core theme is the absolute necessity and the catastrophic failure of trust protocols. In the Satoshi myth, trust was built accidentally, overriding meticulous logic and control. He was searching for OPSEC against centralized threats.
But in Alberto's reality, trust, offered through radical transparency and vulnerability, was brutally exploited by a decentralized community of malicious users. He was searching for safety through distributed trust, and that system imploded.
It brings us back to that cryptographic challenge Satoshi was concerned with, the Byzantine generals problem. How do you achieve consensus among distrusted parties? The problem isn't just in code, it plays out in human relationships. When protocols fail, whether they are communication protocols, community respect, or institutional protections, the entire system, the individual's well-being, collapses.
The ultimate tragic irony is clear. Alberto Daniel Hill was first punished by the centralized system, the state, for being responsible and transparent, landing him in prison. And then he was punished by his own decentralized community, the network, for being vulnerable and open, leading to immense psychological distress.
He tried every avenue, from technical responsibility to radical emotional honesty, to build a safe structure, and every structure ultimately failed because of malice and the breakdown of consensus.
So what is the true, measurable cost of radical transparency and intellectual generosity in the digital age? How do we build resilient communities when the core psychological drivers of those who attack them are malice and a relentless need for power and control? That is the profound, unsettling question we must carry with us long after this deep dive concludes.